Thank you, Mr Deputy President, and I would like to ask the Minister of Environment, Food and Agriculture, further to his answer in July 18, what progress has been made regarding measurement of air quality in the Isle of Man?
Well, the Minister for Environment, Food and Agriculture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. In a letter to honourable members in July 18, I committed to regular monitoring the situation regarding air quality through biannual monitoring of sampling by diffusion tube. This position was clarified in response to a Tynwald question in July 18. In November last year, in response to a question from the Honourable Member of Council, Mrs Sharp, I provided a further update on my department's work regarding measuring air quality in the Isle of Man. I am aware that the UK has recently released a clean air strategy to address the relatively poor air quality in many of their larger cities. However, fortunately, we do not have that problem, as we have no conurbations on that scale, and our island is blessed with plenty of Irish sea winds. You will recall sweet mountain air in our national anthem. The department has had no cause to consider that any change to our position is necessary or justifiable use of resources at this time. I appreciate that the member feels very strongly about this and would welcome another opportunity outside of this court to discuss matters further.
Supplementary question, Mr Peake.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy President, and I'd like to thank the Minister for quoting the part of the national anthem back to me. It's very good of you. It is a serious issue, though, and it's really an opportunity for you. I'm trying to tee this up for you, Minister, to take this, to grasp this opportunity, to show some leadership. Many things are changing in the last year. Even this last week, a factory in Swindon, owned by Honda, has announced it's going to close. There's a change of attitude in diesel car use. Diesel car use, sales have dropped by 30% in the UK and 60% across Europe. It's an opportunity, Minister, to actually take on measurements, to get some evidence, to then make some decisions around evidence, evidence-based decision-making. That's what I'm giving you the opportunity to test this regularly so the measurement is there and you can make some decisions and actually help the public. The question is, when are you going? When are you going to listen, Minister, and when are you going to start taking the opportunity I'm giving you to actually do these tests regularly, every 6 months at least?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I'm glad we got there in the end, and I thank the Honourable Member for giving me an opportunity. I think there is a difference of opinion as to what regular testing means and what information we have. Regular testing with quite sophisticated machinery was carried out until about 10 years ago, and in fact the air quality on the Isle of Man has got better steadily since then, since the decommissioning of diesel power station, and we know what's going on with the energy for waste plant on a real basis in chimney monitoring. The monitoring that we carried out last year revealed that we were still well within under the EU limits, and that the air quality is extremely good. So we are leading there, and we can promulgate a good story. But rather than spend more resource on regular air quality monitoring when we know that the air quality is in general good, I would rather use that resource on our climate change strategy and drive change, which is happening, as you rightly point out, throughout the world at the moment. There is a sea change, and our new climate change strategy identifies interim targets for 2025 and 2030 that revolve around the use of electric vehicles, and I am anticipating that by 2030 around 10,000 electric vehicles will be used on the island, and part of that strategy is to drive electrification of the Isle of Man. At the moment, obviously that doesn't necessarily save on CO2 emissions, but the gas-fired power station is probably as clean and efficient as it gets. But when we turn to renewables in 2030-35, hopefully the Isle of Man will be electrified, heating, transport will be a lot cleaner, and our very clean air will be even cleaner still.
Supplementary question, Mr Shimmons.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Many people would dispute the assertion we've just heard from the Minister for Environment that the recent monitoring indicates that we're well under EU limits. The reluctance to commit to monthly or regular air monitoring, similar to other Crown dependencies, indicates a lack of concern about the impact of poor air quality on people. Will the Minister meet with the Director of Public Health to understand the serious impacts that particulates and other pollutants have on humans?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I acknowledge the fact that poor air quality is a factor in poor health, and particularly in other jurisdictions. I alluded to the fact in my initial answer that the Isle of Man is fortunate that it has no large conurbations that suffer from air quality of the sort that they see perhaps in the UK, and that our air quality has always fallen below EU limits. The last monitoring we did, there were 2 sites that were on the edge of the EU limits, but that would probably reflect certain times of year and poor airflow. Generally speaking, all of the Isle of Man suffers from really good air quality, and I find it very difficult to understand, coming from a member of the Treasury, that he would expect us to commit a lot of extra resource, and that includes expenditure, to monitoring something we know is getting better rather than getting worse, and we can promulgate a good story here. We've been looking at the SAVE campaign and saving money within the department, and there's only so much resource to go around. If I spend it on monthly air quality monitoring with sophisticated equipment, my officers tell me that could cost between £50,000 to £100,000 to set up, and a similar annual cost if it's based on what we used to do 10 years ago. I would much rather spend that money on promoting electrification, climate change strategy, and other matters that require funding.
Supplementary question, Dr Allinson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I'd like to thank the Minister for his answer just then, which highlighted that there were only 2 areas which were remotely close to the levels that would cause concern. Surely, if we're going to have future testing targeting those built-up areas, which are often due to the build-up of traffic and stationary traffic at certain times of the day, would be better than a blanket testing the entire island. Because working with the DOI and looking at traffic management could perhaps reduce that pollution forever.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. We are already aware of where the choke areas are, and Quarter Bridge and Lord Street come to mind. When air quality monitoring carried out on a constant basis, there were 3 prime sites. But I think the air quality monitoring then was more aimed at concerns around the energy for waste plant, as well as traffic and general pollution. My department's very happy to work with DOI in those areas, but the overall strategy of electrification, we now have 200 electric vehicles on the island, 600 hybrid vehicles, and the DOI have incentivised via road tax or vehicle tax the ownership of such vehicles. They will increase in numbers. They're becoming generally available. Engines in modern cars are becoming more efficient and cleaner, and with the vilification of diesel engines, I think we're going to see a move to even cleaner cars using fossil fuels. So the situation will improve over time, and I hope that we will facilitate that and work with the other departments to make sure that people do take up the technology available in vehicle purchase in the future.
Supplementary question, Mrs Lord Brennan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Aside from saying the air quality is good, and in the absence of regular data, what assurance can the Minister give that children in Douglas, in the areas that you've just mentioned there, walking to school, are not subject to particulate matter and nitrogen oxides in the way that might be harmful to their long-term health?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. No one wants people to suffer from poor air quality. We had regular air testing, continuous air testing until around 10 years ago. We carried out a spot check in what we highlighted areas, hotspots as it were, last year, which revealed that, as we anticipated, the results were very similar, if not a little bit better, than the previous continuous monitoring. I think the test of our air is really how we perceive it. I know when I go to larger cities, and I will be in Glasgow later this week, you can actually feel the pollution. When I walk around the Isle of Man, and that includes Douglas, apart from perhaps certain times of day and certain weather conditions, the air is clean, and you know it's clean. And I don't perceive there being big problems outside our schools in the Isle of Man or on our streets generally that would justify expensive air quality testing when we know that the standards are good anyway.
Supplementary question, Mr. Peake.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy President. And it is hard work, this, and I'm going to try another tack, to be honest. I am going to take you up on the opportunity to meet with you. That would be great. And what I'd like now, in this final question now, is your commitment then, as you stated, £100,000 you think it might cost for air quality. If you, as the doctor suggested, target these. If you can work with a third sector party to actually perhaps let them do it for you, I'll work with you on that. If you can commit today that you actually let a third party do this and actually then look at the figures and put those figures out, would you commit to that at least?
Minister to reply.
As I said at the very beginning, I would be very happy to meet with the honourable member to discuss a way forward. And if there is one that is logical and cost-effective, I'm very happy to commit to looking at that.
I have a further 5 supplementary questions, and then I am going to draw a line under this before people start making a comment about the temperature of the air as well. Next up is Mrs. Masker.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Would the Minister not agree that it's actually the location of the testing that is important? And would he consider, when he goes forward with his programme of air quality testing, testing at footpath level? I know through my own experience taking my own children to school, it can be actually discernible the difference in the quality of air at the roadside, especially on inclined areas, heavy goods vehicles going up an incline, and the child is in a pushchair at footpath level, and it's discernible that there is a difference in the air quality from the level that an adult will be walking. So would the Minister agree that it would be very, very worthwhile testing at footpath level on routes to school at this time when we are trying to encourage walking to school and active travel? Would there be merit in that, and would he agree to actually look at this, please? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. There will obviously be times when air quality, particularly from vehicle exhaust emissions, cause concern. I know myself that there are some areas where that is the case. And like you, I'm concerned about air quality around schools. But where do we draw the limit? Do we monitor around every school? And is it specific times? When is it? We know there can be problems when there are massed vehicles sitting there with their engines running. And I would encourage people not to leave their car engines running when they're sitting in a queue. I think taking this forward, I'm very happy to engage in conversations with any members who would like to visit the department. I have been speaking to Mr. Harmer, Minister of DOI, and there may be a way forward with a cheaper form of air testing that we can work with inter-department. So let's take that forward and see where we go.
Supplementary question, Mr. Henderson.
Would the Taoiseach agree that the queries being advanced today are Tynwald member inquiries coming from private Tynwald members as voicing their own concerns? Would you agree, and I think he's coming to the point, that actually quoting £100,000 for a survey is possibly a Rolls-Royce situation, that there may be alternative, easier ways of monitoring the air quality? And thirdly, would you agree that despite some of the figures he's quoting, we still have thousands of vehicles driving around the Isle of Man that are contributing to an overall base level of pollution, and that's something that we need to take very seriously on board?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I'm not quite sure the member is suggesting that we somehow take these vehicles off the road. I think the reality is we encourage people, incentivise people to buy cleaner vehicles, and in particular electrical vehicles, and that's exactly what my department is trying to do. When you talk about the cost of monitoring, I can only rely on my officers for the advice I receive, and I quote here, stations monitoring these parameters, the operational cost, this is 10 years ago, was in the region of £50,000 per annum, and it is estimated that setting it up at present with a new system, using the system that they used to use, would cost around £100,000 per annum. But I have stated, I'm happy to meet members, Minister Harmer and I may have some common ground on this, so let's take that forward and see where we go.
Supplementary question, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. The Minister has mentioned several times the energy from waste plants. There was originally a committee set up that monitors the emissions from the energy from waste plant, and one of the members of this committee came through the Isle of Man Municipal Association. Can I ask the Minister if this committee still actually reconvenes, if they actually meet on a regular basis?
Minister to reply.
I think we're slightly straying off the subject matter here, but I can answer that. There was a consultative committee in existence. We didn't have ownership of that committee. Things evolved with the energy for waste plant. Quite a lot of capital has been expended on continuous real-time monitoring in the stack itself. So those figures are available online to anyone that wants to look at them. Consequently, the committee itself lost relevance, and as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a meeting for some time, although I have met with the Municipal Association and explained the situation from our perspective, and in fact I have a meeting with them, I think, in another month's time.
Supplementary question, Mrs Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. A moss wall measuring approximately 12 foot by 12 foot will absorb as much pollution as 275 trees. Would the Minister consider erecting moss walls at our two pollution hotspots to enable people to walk and cycle to school and work more safely?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. At the moment, no. I think the Isle of Man is almost a continuous mothball. If you look around, even at Quarter Bridge or in Lord Street, Quarter Bridge is surrounded by greenery and trees, and Lord Street you only have to look across the quay and we have open countryside. Mothballs and such devices have been evolved or are to put around schools or in areas that are very urban with no greenery. No such areas in the Isle of Man. So unless someone voluntarily wants to pay for one, certainly my department and I don't think other departments would be willing to fund that.
The final supplementary question on this one is in the hands of Mrs Corman.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I'd just like to challenge the Minister on his remarks about perception of air quality. I'd like to ask the Minister, does he believe an individual's perception of air quality is good enough? That there are many poisons in the air that we can't see, taste or smell, and that without testing we don't know if they're there and we don't know in what quantities they're there. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. We did carry out air monitoring in 2018 in areas that we felt were likely to be highly polluted. As I stated earlier, all of the results came in under the EU limits. And I have to say that there's got to be a personal perception of air quality. We all know when there's bad air quality. If you get high pressure and the air doesn't move, we know that the air quality is not good. But I can safely say that when I walk around the Isle of Man compared to any other jurisdiction where there are large conurbations, the air quality is generally good. And I think this, well, I don't know, maybe you get out of it.
We'll move swiftly on, I think.